Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of the minor prophets by looking some more at the book of Habakkuk and continuing our study of that singular book. And we're getting deeply into the text today, verses 1 through 11. As we've been saying every day, the book of Habakkuk is written about what is to come, the Babylonian captivity, and God's reason behind sending the empire of Babylon to haul the southern kingdom of Judah into captivity. But it's not like any other book in the Bible. As we said, it really is a question and answer session between the prophet and God, and then the realization that the prophet makes. And we talked yesterday about how it just transcends so many genres. It's a wisdom book. It's a prophecy because it's called an oracle in verse 1. It's a prayer, which is called in chapter 3. But that prayer has musical notation, so it's a song. It's all of the above. And it has so much to teach us. We're going to look at verses 1 through 11 today, which is the first question that the prophet Habakkuk brings to God, and then God's response to that first question. So I'm going to read verses 1 through 11. The oracle which Habakkuk the prophet saw. So this is something he's experienced with his senses. He had some sort of visual encounter with the presence of God, and he certainly heard the voice of God. This is quite a tangible, palpable experience that he's having. The oracle which Habakkuk the prophet saw. How long, O Lord, will I call for help, and you won't hear? I cry to you, violence, yet that you do not save. Why do you make me look at iniquity and cause me to gaze on wickedness? Yes, destruction and violence are in front of me. Strife exists and contentions arise. Therefore, the law is ignored, justice is never upheld, the wicked surround the righteous, and justice comes out perverted. This is a bad time culturally. And as we mentioned earlier, he doesn't mention idolatry, although maybe the violence towards righteous people is being instigated by idolaters. I don't know. That's a possibility. But it seems to me that the sins here are the sins of violence, social injustice, and hypocrisy, and immorality. That's what's going on. And he wants to know, why won't God do something about this? And then God answers in verse 5. Look among the nations, observe, be astonished, wonder, because I'm doing something in your days you would not believe if you were told. For behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that fierce and impetuous people who march throughout the earth to seize dwelling places which are not theirs. They are dreaded and feared. Their justice and authority originate with themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards and keener than wolves in the evening. Their horses come galloping. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle, swooping down to devour. All of them come for violence. Their horde of faces moves forward. They collect captives like sand. They mock at kings and rulers, are laughing matter to them. They laugh at every fortress and heap up rubble to capture it. They will sweep through like the wind and pass on, but they will be held guilty, they whose strength is their God. There's so much here. Now, God says, I'm about to do things in your day. Does he mean that Micah will be alive to see this happening? I don't know. If he does, this probably doesn't happen during Hezekiah's lifetime. Maybe later during the reign of good King Josiah. I don't know. But it's going to happen, and it's going to happen soon, and it is going to happen. It's going to happen. There's no way around this. He says to God, as we all have felt at one time or another, maybe every day, how can you let this happen? How can you let this go on and not fix this? Well, what we're asking God to do is to violate free will, aren't we? That's what we really want. We want God to take this bad person who's wanting to do a bad thing and say, no, I'm not letting you do that thing. Cease and desist. You are stopped. I'm controlling your choice to do good or ill. That's what we want God to do. And that is not something God ever does. God does not violate our free will. To be a human being is to have to choose to be responsible for your choices and to be obligated and free to make those choices. What God does is, as is told to us in chapter 3, verse 13, go forth for the salvation of his people. That all things work together for good to them who love the Lord and long for his appearing. God takes the choices that people make and he makes sure that his people are preserved. He makes sure that their souls are not in the balance. He makes sure that the promises he makes to them, he can keep. Now that's what God does do. So Habakkuk brings this question to God, how can you let this go on? And God says, I am going to act, and this is what I'm going to do. And verse 5 is such an important verse. It's quoted by the Apostle Paul in Acts chapter 13, verse 41, in the very first sermon that he preaches. And so this verse is a verse Paul references, and Paul also references at least 2 times that verse in chapter 2, the just shall live by faith, causing many to believe, in addition to other evidence, that Paul himself was tied to the Qumran community in some way that produced the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'm not sure that that's true. But the book of Habakkuk was well known to that community and was important to the Apostle Paul as well, because it's featured in the very first sermon we have of him in Acts chapter 13. And verse 5 is something we should never forget. That God is at work in ways that we do not understand, even if he sat us down and explained it to us. In the same way that I cannot explain the concept of evaporation to a dog, even a super intelligent dog like a border collie, okay? There are things that God cannot explain to us because our brains are finite. They are. And our collective intelligence is finite. It is. And God does things that we're not going to get, even if he sat us down and explained them to us. So there's that. And this is what he's about to do. Now, this we do understand. We do with our 2020 hindsight. I'm bringing the Babylonians to haul my people into captivity. I just am. And they're bad. And he talks about how bad they are. And if we think that Babylonian captivity was somehow just a rearranging of populations, read Psalm 137 and how bad it was. It was bad. And he's going to bring the Babylonians to haul them into captivity. And of course, Babylon, the Jews were always sandwiched between superpowers. There were the Hittites, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, and the Egyptians. And they're always surrounded by these superpowers in this small country. But they've always been protected by God. One angel took out 250,000 Assyrian troops in one night, okay? So if they would rely on God, they're going to be okay. But they didn't. And they didn't obey his law, and they didn't worship him as God. I mean, they just didn't. And yet, God made a promise to Abraham and a promise to David that he's got to keep in Jesus. So he has to prepare a people ready to receive the Messiah. And Babylonian captivity is a tool of him doing that. So this is going to happen. And something else is going to happen that I don't think Habakkuk was listening to, because if he had heard these last 2 lines, he may not have had to ask his second question. They will be held guilty, they whose strength is their God. I want to punish them too. We're going to get to the second question and the second answer tomorrow. Thank you for spending nearly 10 good minutes with me this morning. I'm Barry Bryson, and we'll see you next time.